30th, 1986, in her home about First Baptist Church Katy.
The R.B. Wilkerson family is my mother's family that started here. And her maiden name is Wilkinson. And Grandfather Wilkerson and my Aunt Grace, my mother's older sister, came in 1898 to Katy. They came because Adam Stockdick and other, we'd call them real estate people today, but they had been given some land to sell by the railroad. The railroad had come into Katy in 1895. And so as the railroad had come in, they had acquired some land along the right-of-way. And so several men of that early time became agents to sell this property. So they advertised in the north, in Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, and quite a large number of families came from the north. We call it Midwest now, but we said from the north, because they had fought, their forefathers had fought in the Civil War on the side of the north, and they came here and they came in with the southern people who had settled in this part of the country. Well, Grandfather thought the ground looked awfully low and wouldn't drain well, so Mr. Stockdick took him north on this, what we call Katy Hockley today, and they went out 7.5 miles, and they called it Wolf Hill because it's the highest little knoll of ground coming in from Galveston, from the seashore in, is Wolf Hill. And so the Wilkersons bought land there. Then soon afterward, my dad, A.E. Thompson, came to buy land, and in 1899, he and my mother, who was Gertrude Wilkerson, before she married my dad, and my oldest sister, Velma, came from Iowa. And they came from Livingston, Iowa. And they bought land right close to the Wilkersons, out here on Wolf Hill, on this same road that I live on now. And so they had, all of the Wilkerson family came after Grandfather and some of the boys had erected a house. Well, 1900, terrible, the worst hurricane of the time, I guess of all time, came in at Galveston, and that's when thousands of people were drowned in Galveston, and that same storm swept out across this prairie of Katy, and no communications. There were no telephones, there were no radios in those days, and these people from the north had never heard of a hurricane, let alone experiencing one. And that night, my dad and mother's schoolhouse with my older sister, a baby, blew down, and the wind was so bad they crawled on their hands and knees and got across to the Wilkerson house. And they hadn't no more than gotten in the Wilkerson house. It was a big 2-story home, a nice home, and it turned over on its roof. And so they went through that terrible experience, and you'd have thought they probably would have packed up and gone back to Iowa, but they didn't. They stayed, and many people have said for like 10 years it took people here in Katy to rebuild. And the first little school, I should have brought the picture to show you the first school in Katy, and I will get it for you. It was blown over, and the building that the Baptist Church is donating to the Heritage Society, it's sitting there by Doobie's Store in downtown Katy. It was called the Featherston Home in those days, and it weathered the storm. And the kids that were in school, just a very few of them, a handful of people, went to the Featherston. The teacher took them to the Featherston house and taught them in the upper part of that building that you see being moved at this time there by Doobie's Store. And so that is one of the buildings, the original buildings in Katy that didn't go down in the storm. And the other one that I know that you're familiar with is an old 2-story house sitting on the corner of 5th and East Avenue. And the Morrison family uh, had that in. It was in their family, and they brought it back and are planning to restore it completely. And so that's kind of the background of how we got here. I was born in 1908, the middle child of 7 children. And Jessica, your grandfather, Albert, was next to the youngest brother. And we lost Albert this year, the first one of us to die. And we're so thankful that in March of this year we had pictures made, and we're all old, but we're all still living, and except Albert, and we lost him this year. And but we're glad that we had that picture made this past year. And so that's kind of, and I'll let you start asking questions now about what you want to know.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
First of all, the story about Wolf Hill, I know, wasn't it about when the places would flood, all the wolves?
The wolves came up on this knoll. That's the reason they called it Wolf Hill, because this prairie flooded badly. There was no flood control back in those days, no ditches dug, no way to drain this flat prairie. And so the Wolf Hill was actually, wolves actually, and as a child, when I started South Maid School, I remember seeing wolves in the schoolyard early in the morning. That's, and they still are in this pasture behind us sometimes. The coyotes, I think, in those early days, they were large timber wolves.
Well, Daddy was telling me also that sometimes whenever they would go out and kill a bunch of wolves, they would hang them on the stairs.
Yes, they did that later because, that was on the cutoff road that Albert Jr. lived on. On the corners out there, they used to hang still wolves. But, they were very prevalent. My brother Olin remembers when they went to a sawmill in Hockley to get lumber, and they had to build a South Maid school. And coming back, the dogs that had followed their wagon were attacked by wolves coming back from the sawmill, and the dogs had to get under the wagon in order to keep the wolves from, attacking them. So there's all kinds of stories like that.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just, could you tell me in order the names of all your brothers and sisters?
Yes, Velma is the oldest, and I talked to her this morning, and she's 87, and she's doing well. She's been in the hospital, but she's fine, doing better. And she lives in Arlington, and her husband is deceased, but she has children around her that are careful, and that's good. And the second one is Olin, and he lives at the very end of Katy Hockley out here, and he has a great big home, getting back on large acreage, and he and his wife are both still living, and they are in their early 80s, but they're still here. Then Marjorie is the third child, and she had lived in Katy. She and her husband Sam Furman for a number of years, and they and their family moved to Carbo and lived on a ranch for a long time. And just very recently, she and her daughter Liddell have moved back, and they live off of Fly Road, and so we get to see Marjorie Furman. A sister older than I. Then I'm the next one, and I married a policeman, but I don't guess you want to get into that.
Well, that's later on.
Okay. Then next was Elsie, and she married George Vaughn, but she lives on Drexel Street here in Katy. She and George had a business in Houston, but they've been back out here for quite a long while. And she's recently been widowed also. And then next is Albert, and he has lived here practically all his life, just for a short time. And Norma lived in Houston. He went to A&M, and has been a farmer, rancher, and very civic-minded person in the community all these years. The baby is my brother Leslie. Some people call him Tommy in the service in World War II because his last name was Thompson. They called him Tommy, and so some people still call him Tommy. We always called him Leslie, and he's approaching 70. He's a baby.
He and Papa look so much alike.
Yes, yes, very much so.
Okay, I'd like you to like state your full name and the dates of birth and where you were.
Okay. In those days, the children weren't born in the hospital, and my mother and Dad lived on the same land that my oldest brother Owen. He's on Woodhill today at the end of Katy Hospital, and it's not the same house, but on the same property. And Olin has in his possession these deeds and all to that land that was bought for $5 an acre at that time, and when Dad bought it. And so I was born in their first home out there, and I was born in 1908. I'm 77 out this past November. And Dr. Stewart was then a doctor, the first Dr. Katy ever had. And he had to come by horse and buggy clear to Wolf Hill in order to get there. And many times Mother almost had the children before Dr. Stewart ever arrived, but I think he was there to deliver me. And my middle name is Gertrude, which I don't really care for, but it was my mother's name, and so I made it Gertrude.
Were your parents original settlers in Katy?
Original? By that, what do you mean?
Or were they one of the first settlers?
Well, there were many people here, a few people here before they came. As I say, they came in 1898, and Mr. Thomas, who gave the town site, had already given the town site of Katy, and the railroad had already gone in, and there was a hotel and a few little homes in Katy. And that first school, I think, was built shortly after they came, or about the time, about around 1900, because the school blew down during the storm, so that tells me that the school was built in the late 1980s. How early the very first person came, I'm not sure, but they were among the very first settlers.
Do you know what brought them here?
Yes, what brought them here was two things. A grandfather, Wilkinson, had fought in the Civil War on the side of the North, and he was taken captive by the South. And he was brought to Texas and imprisoned for a while at Tyler, Texas, and it's beautiful up there in East Texas. He also, before he was captured, had been camped at on Matagorda Bay, down on the bay. And the peculiar thing about his was that he had never become a Christian, and while he was at Matagorda Bay, someone held a revival, and I don't know who it was, but he was won to the Lord and baptized, and I tells me maybe it was a Baptist, but he was baptized in the Matagorda Bay. Well, he went back home after the war. He had not married when all this was going on, and so he said if sometime down the line he was going to come back to Texas. He liked it so well. And he reared 10 children in the North, and 8 of them survived to come to Texas, and they all came to Katy. And so the Wilkinsons in those early days, there was a good many of my mother's 5 brothers and there's 3 sisters of them. And one of the sisters did not marry, and the other married a Hoyt. And so the Hoyt family, that's well known in Katy, they was married into that family as my brother married a Stockton, so everybody always says don't talk about anybody because it might be some relatives. And that's really true.
Well, do you know how your parents met?
They were neighbors in the North. grew up together, and many times that happened because young people didn't have the advantages of going off to college and meeting other people and communicating like we do nowadays. And so many times in those early days, you married someone in your own community, and they did.
I'm asking questions about my family. Okay. Okay, so you were born here.
Yeah.
And when you first went to school,
The South-Made School was built because the people out here in this area of Wolf Hill and the Beckendorfs, the Southern family, lived just a short distance away, and the Latins had come from Chicago, and they all wanted schools for their children, and there were no schools. There was a little one-room school in Katy to start with. And so, as I told you, they went to Honkley, the only lumber yard or where they milled the lumber, and the sawmill, and bought lumber and brought it back and built the South-Made School. It was on the corner of this street, Katy Honkley, and 529 that crosses. And the little building was at one time used by other families, and we're not sure, but we have an idea of where that building might still be, or at least part of it. But my oldest sister went off to San Marcos to the Baptist Academy, to school, and when she came back, she taught in those South-Made schools. There were about when I was there, I found this in one of my teachers, and there were 18 people in the school. That was all of us from out there, and it was from about 4 or 5 families. And names like Beckendorf, and there's still Beckendorfs all over Katy, the Thompsons, and the Pitts, and one of the adopted girls married a Pitt, and the Thompsons, and the Freemans, and those were the early people that were people. This was printed in 1919, and so I guess I was about, I don't know what grade I was in. I was born in 8, and you didn't start school until you were 7, so how old would I have been in 1990? But anyway, I would have been 11.
and where is it y'all would live in?
We lived on the land that Olin and Rowena have at the very end of Katy Hockley, and that's where we lived.
Do you remember any games or anything about school? I remember Mimi was telling me something about a game called Mumble Bed with 2-bladed knives or
They
something.
threw the knife and the way it landed, but the boys played normal these days.
Well, this is Aunt Ruthie too,
Yeah.
so she was the tomboy. So.
The boys did let us play marbles. Sometimes they dug a hole and you started, with your thumb, you thumped the marble. And that was one of the things they did. But we played games like hide and seek and Rover wants to come over, and then tag, and we played a game that we called Andy Over. And it was the little schoolhouse was just a little one-room school, and so we would throw the ball over the roof of the school, and the ones on the other side would try to catch the ball, and if they caught it, we called it Andy Over. And I don't know if we made that up or if it was something that
Play that out the ranch. When we were kids.
And so we received a plaque, and I believe that's 20 and 20 in the year 19, 20, and 21 from the state. Our teacher had led us to try for excellence in not drinking coffee or tea or anything that would injure our health. And so we did that, and we kept records on what we had done, and we got that banner from the state of Texas. And then these other pictures are from downtown Katy. Okay. You want to ask me anything?
What are some of the first thoughts you can remember about going to school?
Well, one of the first things, I'm sure you kids can't even fathom what it's like to just be isolated way at the end of this street and have no communication with anyone except just going into Sunday school on Sunday morning. And the nearest people around you were your relatives from the north, and their few children. And so when I started the school, I didn't know anyone. And I had heard people talk with the same accent that came from Iowa. And Veda Beckendorf, Edna Dolan's older sister, my age, was in my class, and I believe that she and I were the only ones starting school that year. And so I was Ada and she was Veda, but she was Veda Beckendorf, so we all had it too. I remember her, she put an R on everything that she said. She said Winder and Ada, and I couldn't understand everything that she said. And it was peculiar because we had no TV or nothing to listen, radio or anything to ever have listened to anyone that talked differently. She said Creek and my people from where they had grown up said Creek for a stream of water. And so we kind of had to really listen carefully to know what each other was, you know, that it wasn't a different language, but it sounded different. And so that was the first shock to me. And then the food that she had in her lunchbox was entirely different than mine. My mother always had what we call light bread or white bread, just plain bread. And she baked her own bread, or she had a black woman on the farm early in my childhood, and she was a good baker. She helped my mother some in the kitchen, and she made white bread. You couldn't just run to the store and get a loaf of bread in those days. And so when I had a sandwich, well, maybe it had a patty of sausage made like a low patty cake. Or it had a hard fried egg in between it. Or something that we didn't have lunch meat, so they had to come up with something. But, well, when Veda opened her lunch pail, it was a great big biscuit, a huge biscuit, you know, made from hot, like hot bread is nowadays, only it was so big that she put link sausage stuff, sausage like cut in half and all in there. That looked so good to me, and we would trade lunches. What I had looked good to her, and so I remember that.
You guys still wrap sandwiches up in the same paper?
No, I don't remember that.
No,
We
no,
did.
no, no. Okay. I'm starting to ask you about church. You said you went into town church, or did you have it at the school?
No, we went to Katy, and we started very early, and in those early days, the Baptists had organized a church, but they didn't have a church building, and they had met in home some, but the Methodists finally got a church building, and so they had such a small group that they invited the Baptists to have charge of the service one Sunday and use the same building, and we met together, and we called our Sunday school a Union Sunday School, and I remember very well going to that. And a Baptist minister preached one Sunday, and a Methodist minister preached the next, and so it was very nice. And we grew up not hardly knowing who was Baptist and who was Methodist. And one thing that happened, some of the Morrison family that belonged to your side of the family who had founded the Baptist church, there were, I think, 12 people who were the charter members. And they were Morrisons. And many of them married into the Methodist church girls and became Methodists down the line. And so you have some very strong Baptist people up there that started originally. But my parents stayed, and two or three of the Wilsons stayed with the Baptist faith. And in 1910, the ladies, Baptist ladies said, well, it's time for us to get our own church building. And so they got the money together, and from Adam's Stockbridge, they bought that little corner of where our Baptist Church chapel is today, where the chapel is, that corner, that was the first property. And so, do you want me to wait until you change that over? And so they started getting funds together for a building in 1913. We started worshiping in our first little white church building. And my father was the first Sunday school superintendent, as they call them, directors now they say. But we drove this ruddy, it was not blacktop, it was not anything but just a ruddy trail out this Katy Hockley. We had a Mach 2 Ford, and not everybody had cars. There's still some people going in wagons and buggies. But Dad bought his first car in 1912, so we had a car, and we went every Sunday, come rain, wind, high water, or what. We went to church, and my dad not only had to was superintendent of Sunday school, but he had to build the fire. When we got there, this building had just one great big, what we called a big pot-bellied stove in the middle of the room, and we nearly froze to death waiting for my dad. You can imagine the building not having been heated all week long, and a cold, cold Sunday morning, and we went into the cold building, so we wanted to go to church, you know, in order to do that. But I guess it was a good thing, because all of us stayed faithful to our church and to the cause of Christ, and so I think it didn't hurt us to do it. I can remember seeing Joe Freeman pray. He was one of the early settlers, and he always had those glasses on the end of his nose, and when he prayed, I was a little bitty girl, so I watched him instead of bowing my head like I was supposed to, and he'd always put his glasses down like this, and he'd look up just like he was talking to the Lord, you know, and things like that impressed me, and I think we had good training, considering the circumstances.
Yeah, when y'all had, you said y'all were in Sunday school, did everybody meet together, or was just the kids together, or were y'all separated by age?
We were separated by age, and they had not as carefully as we are graded today, but the adults met together, and the young people, older young people met together, and then maybe school-age people met together, and then little ones, and they had what they call the cradle roll, and my aunties, I worked, and my Aunt Grace was one of the first ones. She had someone in the church build a table that was like a half moon, and she sat here, and the children sat around her to teach, and that was just something that she thought of herself, but today it was considered good teaching, and she didn't know it.
Was that loft up there then? In the old fellowship hall, is that where the Sunday school was?
No, loft? See, that's not the building I'm talking about. No, it was a little white frame building until 1942.
Okay, it's not the fellowship hall there, even when I was there.
Yes. Well, it was in 42. That building was finished, or in the early 40s. I'll have to get my records to be sure today on that. But they did use the upstairs in this area for the use up there. Sure did.
Did y'all have a baptistry in there?
In the early church, I was baptized in 1920, and the pulpit area was raised like it is nowadays in churches. And under the raised platform of the pulpit area, they took the rug up, rolled it up, and took up boards that were like a hinged door, and there was a baptistry underneath. And so they moved the furniture back, and I was baptized there. And but people before that time that had been baptized were baptized in streams
Y'all did have
and
streams?
rivers. But in my day, we did have a baptistry in that First Baptist Church that we built.
So I have a choir there?
Yes, they had small choirs. My uncles all sang in the choir, and the Wilkersons had good voices, and they had maybe just 7 or 8, but they had a little choir. And we had preachers that came, not some, in the early days you couldn't afford a preacher every day, every Sunday, and so sometimes they came every other Sunday. And many of them came from seminary, like in that line. Oh. Now, what do you want? What do you start with?
Trevor and
Yeah. Did y'all have services at night on Sunday night also, or just some morning?
Well, I can't remember ever going until I was a teenager at night. And I don't know if some of them in Katy, we did not go back from Wolf Hill when I was a little big girl at night. And I have a feeling that they maybe didn't have services at night, but I'm not sure about that, and I don't know why I've never thought to really try to research that. Maybe the Morrisons or some of them in Katy might have gone at night, but I doubt that. But when I was a young woman, in my teens, we had what we call BYPU, Baptist Young People meeting, and with the boy under the songbook. And I can remember writing notes when I was supposed to during church, and all the things, same things that you kids do nowadays. And it may be a little different, but kids are kids, pretty much. And I was sitting the other Sunday night where I could see some young people, and they were giggling, passing notes, and I thought, well, they shouldn't be doing that. And then I thought, Ada, you did it too, so don't worry about it. But Malcolm Stewart, the doctor's son, went to the Baptist church, and we kind of liked each other, so we held hands and we thought that But we had good training, good literature, and for a little town and a little church, we think it was good. Very good.
Were you married at that church?
Yes, the first one before it was torn down. My husband and I married there in 1918, and 1930, not 1918. 1930, we married in the little white church and moved to Houston immediately. He was on the police force, and so he already had a house rented in Houston, and he moved there.
What'd you dress with?
It was a white satin dress and a bridal veil.
And, well, did you have a maid of honor? Or
I had 8 girls, and you won't believe this because no one had ever heard of this before. And I know there were no bridal consultants in those days, or no one would tell you how to do weddings or to help you with your wedding. So each girl practiced did what she wanted to, I guess. At least I did. And so I had these friends, and your Aunt Ruth was one of them. And Irene Miller, Arthur Miller that has Miller Motor, his sister, had gone to college with me. And and she was one of my friends, and I had 8 of my close girlfriends. And they formed kind of like a bridal for me to walk with me instead of coming in, because the guys couldn't rent tux in those days. And so we just used my 8 girlfriends, and then the 8 escorts of these girls, the 8 guys, were seated together, but they actually weren't participants in the wedding. And the girls had little streamers with flowers, and they kind of made a knot between them, and they gathered around with the altar.
were their dresses different colors or all the same?
They were different husbands. When we had daisies. just plain shot the bases.
Did you have a reception after this?
Yes, my mother had a reception, and it was in this house right here. By that time, we had moved here. My wedding reception was here. They moved in this home, and this white home next door in 1926. And while we were still in high school, I went off to Dayton School, to the girls' school there. It was called CIA at that time, and I graduated in 27 and went on to college. And then the Depression was hitting the farmers for that time, and the other children needed to go to college, and so in those days you could teach on elementary certificates. And so I went to went 1 year to Denton, and then I went to Texas University 12 weeks, and then I took some extensive courses, and I taught school at Foster, a little place between here and Rosenberg that's not there now. And then the next year I taught at Mackey out of Wharton, and I taught a lot of Mexicans on the range down at Wharton. And then I married a policeman the next year instead of going back to college like I was supposed to.
Okay, can I double back to high school real fast?
Yes, I need to. Tell you some things about that.
Well, my questions were, first of all, did you go to Katy High?
Yes.
Okay.
From South Maid, we went into Katy to high school. And our group of girls were the first ones to have cooking and sewing. Up until that time, they hadn't had home ec in the Katy High School. They just had reading, writing, arithmetic, I guess, the fundamentals. And so Mrs. Ware made us all the garments that the girls made. We had to send to the state office in Austin. We had to mail them there and have them graded and sent back. And because of our efforts and our good teacher, we got the accreditation for Katy High School in home ec. So that was one thing that we did. I also was an extemporaneous speaker in the county and regional represented school speaking, and was runner-up a couple of times and for that. Also played tennis for the school in competition, doubles, and I also played basketball. I liked they let girls play tennis and basketball, and but no.
Do you remember what your graduation was like?
Yes, I well remembered. I tried so hard to be at the top of my class, and Irene Miller was valedictorian, and your Aunt Ruthie was salutatorian, and I was 1/4 of a point behind her. And, but they did put my picture in the paper along with the other two girls, and I guess it was because it was so close.
But they only used your grades from the senior year, though, didn't they?
Yeah, I believe, yeah.
It
And so we all had, I still have my speech that I made. We were all, it was such a small class, 7 of us that graduated in that 1927 class, and I had my class ring and all. I could have done that for y'all, but I thought your time was limited. But anyway, I've got a lot of mementos. Mr. Says he's going to get a display cabinet down there where he is and put all my junk in there from these days like this, and about the school and display it.
What do you remember of some of the fun times in your childhood?
We played mostly with brothers and sisters and a few cousins near because of not being able to travel from one place to the other. And until I got to school, played just with our brothers and sisters, and we made up our own fun, but it seemed like we never did lack for having fun. We did things, we were on a farm, and there was always areas that we could explore and things that we could do, and our parents were real good about taking us to every activity that they thought that they could. I remember my dad taking us to Ellington Field, and I've seen our first airplanes up close. We had seen them in the sky. But you know, it's peculiar, just the short span of my life. I remember the first telephone. I remember the first radio. I remember the first airplane. And that's first car. And that's the thing that kids all take for granted. And just like I say, in one lifetime, you could see how the world has changed. But we didn't know if we were or not privileged. We didn't realize that we had a good time. And there was an awful lot of love and joy with, all my brothers and sisters. We just had a good time. And there was a lot of, we had a piano, we sang and we played and had music. And all the family always was musical. Even my mother's family, we loved music. They all played instruments. Grandfather works, and we don't know how he knew, but he taught them to play guitars and banjos, violins. So, we played in trees, and we played in the implement shed, we got in the hayloft, and jumped on the hay when we weren't supposed to, and all those things. But it was fun.
What do you remember getting some of the ones that
When I didn't get what I thought old Santa Claus was going to bring, I had friends, and nearly all my friends were only children, and they were from families in Katy, like the banker's daughter and the doctor's son, and there you go.
Yours over?
And so I saw them with nicer dolls and prettier things than I had, and I guess that was more disappointing until I realized it was just my parents were doing the very best they could for 7 kids. Just
There's a couple more school questions.
all right.
Do you think school is stressful for the boys and girls when you were going to school?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I really can't recall that we felt like that we couldn't do, because we did just about all the athletic things that, But there came a time they didn't let the girls play basketball, but when I started in high school, we were playing basketball. So we didn't play volleyball until later in Katy competitively, but or track either. But we did play basketball and we played even Houston teams, and we really thought it was something we did thing because we had to practice on a dirt court. They had all these things. We'd go in and play on the inside the courts, and we didn't hardly know how to play on them.
You mentioned that you were in extent in high school. Did they have did they have a speech club at that time?
Yes, well, I don't know that we called it a club. When I went off to college, I belonged to a speech club and took a speech in college. But I did represent the school in executive speaking.
What other events did they have?
Drama, I don't know that we had very much drama. Seems we did have plays, and I don't remember it entering plays in competition, and if we did, I don't know if we did.
What kind of jobs did you have to do in school?
As I say, I was third runner-up, and that was my part in the graduation, and other than athletics, at recess time, they always had me playing the piano. My dad told me, Ada, you cannot dance, you can't dance. And so I played the piano and let everybody else dance, But
Did you have lessons from it? Or
Oh, yes, we had that music teachers in the community. Miss Hickman was a music teacher, and my oldest sister, my dad, when he came in from the field, took my oldest sister across to Mrs. Tucker. Do you know the Tucker? Right. Tied into the thing. And she was on a farm with the Tucker out close to Wolf Hill, and Dad took them, and we all took them.
Sorry.
Okay.
What did you do during your summer vacation?
Oh, dear. I guess we were. Had to learn to milk cows because farming during the Depression years, and kids have heard about the bad Depression about the time I was to go off to college. The farmer was hard hit, and Dad had other children wanting to go to school, and so he put in dairy cows, and we all learned to milk cows, and I learned to milk too, and so that was one of the things I always had to do. And even before I could go on a date, I had to go milk the cows.
Did you have any kind of work in First Baptist Church? Did you work?
No, I didn't work out away from I helped at home until I went off to college, and then I taught school for 2 years before I married.
What were some of the main social activities?
Well, my children laughed because one of the things that we did that I guess kids don't do very much nowadays was go Kodaking. And everybody had their Kodak, and so many of the pictures that I have in my old album shows us on the railroad track. And my children say, well, Mother, why were you on the railroad track? Well, there was only one paved street in Katy, and it wasn't paved, it was shelled, and that's Avenue 8. And that was the main street. We called it Main Street. And the only other place that you could really walk, a few of the houses had a little sidewalk, and Dad even had sidewalks around our house. And the kids a lot of times just came to homes. We went to each other's houses, and just got together. But we did go to Kodak an awful lot, especially on Sunday afternoons. And I have an awful lot of pictures of just acting silly, just anything to get together. And we had ice cream suppers, we had programs at the school, programs at the church, and we were given assigned things to think about. We had to memorize poems and all those kinds of things, and it was just a whole different world.
You remember going out to school to pick violets?
Yes, we did. We picked violets, and also we had May baskets on the first day of May. We fixed little flower baskets, and we went and knocked on the door, like kids do, kind of like Halloween, going around. And only we thought that we would be treated the host hostess of that home, where we not. We presented them with a little basket of flowers, and sometimes we got invited in for refreshments. But that was a May Day tradition, and they don't do that much anymore. I don't remember winding the maypole. My children did, on May Day, but we didn't take the May back.
What was considered the role of the woman in society?
Well, men took the leadership in school and church, but there were a lot of lady teachers. I had all lady teachers in South Maid in elementary, and I had some lady teachers in high school, about a mixture of half and half. In fact, there were more lady teachers than men teachers. We had coaches for basketball, and they taught other subjects also that were men, and the principal was always a man. But I don't know, how did you, what was the question again?
The role.
The role. Well, I think she was more of a homemaker in those days, perhaps, because not an awful lot of people were career people, especially, I guess, after girl thought that she couldn't get married and have children, maybe more than they do nowadays, but teaching and nursing and other professions were considered at that time.
What sort of medical attention is available in the class?
We had one doctor, and later Dr. Hickman and Dr. Stewart, and then Dr. Stewart, after his death, others took his place. The Katy Drug, where Katy Drug is across from Doobie's in downtown Katy, has been there for forever. And they had the very first telephones in Katy, from the druggist to the doctor's home and back and forth. Later, my brother remembers when they talked just in a circle out here around Wolf Hill. There wasn't a telephone line from Katy to Wolf Hill at first, and so the neighbors hung their line on the barbed wire fence that's along the top of the fence on the fence post. And later, the Beckendorfs and the Lappins and the Thompsons and Wilkinsons all got together, and we put a line clear into Katy and connected with the Katy telephone system, and we had a central that we could ring, but we all were on one line out this way, and everybody had their own ring. Like if our phone rang and it was a long and too short ring, we needed to answer that. That was our ring. If somebody else rang 3 shorts, that was someone else, and everybody knew their ring. Well, that didn't, but you could take down and listen in on somebody else's conversation. And my sister, younger than I, Elsie, boyfriend, George Vaughn, would call and ask Elsie for a date. And so when he got ready to say goodbye to sister, he knew that there was one of the neighbor ladies always listened in. So he'd say, well, goodbye, Elsie, and then he said, goodbye, Mary. And that other person that was listening in was named Mary Kelly. So he'd say, goodbye, Mary. And because he knew she was listening. So it was fun. We finally did get straight lines, but not for a long time.
Do you remember ever going into the doctor?
Yes, later. People didn't run to the doctor like they do nowadays, and you went through measles and mumps and chickenpox and all those things with just your mother or grandmother or somebody giving you home remedies. And if it was something severe, they took you to the doctor's office because it was very difficult for the doctor. The doctor made house calls up until the time that I married, though. They would come to the home to see you if you were too well told. And when my sister's hip was broken in high school, they took me to Houston to the hospital. There were no hospitals out of school. We had to go in Houston, but they were available. And we did in case of severe things. My youngest brother had a ruptured appendix, and he didn't get hospitalized, things like that. So yes, we had medical attention, but not just every time you turn around like we do now.
Do you remember the smallpox quarantine?
Yes. I have a horrible scar about this big. They thought it was, the thing to do was to scratch like this instead of just pricking your arm. And the doctor just did like this, and we all had places just like this, just horrible places, instead of having just a little place, come up, that would scab over from smallpox vaccination. And some people almost lost their arms. It really was severe. They didn't know how to vaccinate in those days. So there's a lot of things in medical that we didn't know. And I can remember after we married and had our own children, that we had the vaccination for polio, but up until then we were scared to get polio.
This is what we talked about the smallpox vaccination.
Did she have a large one also?
Yeah, she was one of the ones that started it because she got it, brought it back here and they didn't know what it was. And so she was giving it to a lot of people. And then the one day that the doctor called me, a health guy from Houston, to check it out and see if that's what it was. He came in to see him, and Ruby and they were like outside playing in between her house and the other woman's house.
She didn't have smallpox, did she?
Yeah.
Did she? I didn't remember Ruby. I know Ruby real well. She grew up with her.
And so they were in between houses just playing along the street or something. So the health investigator comes all the way in from Houston, and the doctor brings him out there. And Ruby's nowhere to be found.
They'll quarantine her. you know, they
Mrs.
do.
Vaughn tried to sit there and tell the guy, I don't know where she is. She's out spreading it somewhere.
That was probably Mildred Vaughn and Ruby. So I'm sure it probably was. We almost died a couple of times. One time was measles, that the regular red measles, and there was no vaccination for that. And several people were just, and one of our school teachers did die from measles. And so it wasn't unheard of people losing their lives because of some disease they didn't know how to deal with it. And if they, doctors did the best they could, but most babies were delivered in the home. And maybe people who lived in Houston did go to the hospital even at the time, but it was unheard of out here. But,
She has a lot of money, you know.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going to start asking you about some of the dating customs that used to go
Well,
on.
I dated several different boys in high school, and I guess the one guy that was able to do more as far as transportation and taking me places was Arthur Miller, who owns Miller Motor, and he had a car with the rumple seats, you know, and all that, back when that was really something, you know. And we went into Houston to movies and to things at the City Auditorium, live plays and things that not all the kids got to do.
Mom wasn't Uncle Arthur.
Well, she's not related.
Because, well, you know, Auntie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was curious. Okay.
Anyway, he was my steady for a long time, and I roomed with his sister in college, and so, you know. And then I met all the time my husband was in the neighborhood. They moved out from Houston in 1910, and he was dating Allie Abra, Ruby Wood's sister. She's older than Ruby, and she's another one that did the interview. She's in the basketball. She's the second one here. And she's a year older than I, or 2 years older than I. Okay.
How did you and your husband meet?
Well, we met just as kids, and my husband always said that I waved to him through the back window of my daddy's car going to church and flirted with him all the way. And that's the way we met. But he was going to the Katy school when I came from South Mady, and he and Rowena, his sister, and older brother Farley were already in the Katy school. They lived over here on Katy Road, back here in the same section on here.
So when you were in high school, you were living
Right here.
right?
No, right, I was living right here in this house right next door.
Oh,
The trailer's house?
Uh-huh.
Oh.
That was built by my see, my parents built this. That was Franklin Thompson. And so they moved us from Wolf Hill in here so that we could go to school and have all the advantages of town rather than traveling. It doesn't seem far to go to the end of Katy Hockley now, but it did then, because they even graded this road with oxen in those early days, you know, teams of oxen graded, full graded to grade this road because it was just a ruddy, sandy road. You could walk down on.
How long did your husband and you date until you became engaged?
About 2 years. He had dated Allie Abra steady, and I dated Arthur Miller steady, and then Arthur went to NM, and I went to CIA at Denton, and we just broke up and didn't, you know, keep dating, and so I was kind of just dating different people, and my husband went on, Abs went on the police force in Houston, and he started coming back out, and I'd come home from Mackey where I was teaching, and we started dating on weekends, And we finally decided that we loved each other and wanted to get married, so we did. And my dad thought I should go back to college, and he was very happy about that. But I had taken enough correspondence that I have about the equivalent of 2 years. College is all I had.
Well, then how long were you engaged before you got married?
Oh, just about a year. Actually, we're in this morning.
What did y'all do for y'all's honeymoon?
We didn't have a honeymoon. He had been on the force such a short while that he only had 3 days, and so we had bought furniture and had put 4 rooms of furniture in a low rent house in Houston. And when we got through the wedding reception out here at Katy, he had rented a real pretty sports car. And so we went back to Houston in the sports car and went to our own home. And the next day we went to ball games. He was a sports fan, and he thought that was the thing to do. He introduced me to Ducky Medwick and I can't remember all the players of the 1930s that was on the Buff team. We knew them all, and they all knew him because he had worked at ball games. And so, that was our honeymoon. That was it.
Okay. Were you still in the rent apartment when you found out that you were pregnant? How long did y'all
Yes.
live
I had my first baby 9.5 months after we married. And so that should tell you about birth control in those early days. But anyway, Evans was 24 and a half when we were married, and I was 22, so we weren't just kids, so it was fine. It was all fine.
Do you remember how you told him that you were pregnant?
Well, I don't know. No, I don't remember. I think he just knew.
Well, were you scared or excited or?
Well, we were scared because we didn't know how we were going to afford a baby, paying for furniture and all that. We were real scared, and to make it worse, about halfway through my pregnancy, his salary was cut from $140 a month, which was a good salary in those days. That sounds horrible, but it really wasn't bad at all because you could eat on $25 a month. You could pay $25 a month, or maybe a little more for rent, and about that much on your furniture and all. Things was in proportion to what you made. And so people began to get in bread lines and in soup lines, and were out of work. The stock market had crashed in '29, the year before we married, and it was just a real bad economical time. And so the police, he never lost work, but they cut the policeman from $140 to $90. And so you can imagine that we had some days that we didn't have a whole lot. But we were fortunate in that many of our neighbors